I believe you support the Black Panthers and the Young Lords, is that correct?
We have what we call the Rainbow Coalition, which is a coalition between the Panther Party, the Patriot Party, and the Young Lords organization. This organization expresses solidarity because we recognize this is a class struggle. And we recognize the class we come from, the oppressed people, has no color.
We'll stand together. We'll have a black army, a Mexican-American army, an alliance and solidarity. We'll have some progressive whites, all of us. And we're going to march on this pig power structure, and we're going to say, stick 'em up, motherfucker. We come for what's ours. Up against the wall. Power to the people. Thanks, brother.
So, in fact, you spoke about how detrimental Obama's presidency was for African Americans and how Black Lives Matter started during his tenure and how mass incarceration increased and so on. Mm-hmm. So in this connection, I would like to go back to our earlier discussion of the appropriation of the original Rainbow Coalition. It's commoditized appropriation you speak about. So I would in fact like to know first, before it being appropriated, were there certain internal fragilities, vulnerabilities, tension, which led to its dissipation and which allowed it to be appropriated later in 1980s? You talk about J.C. Jackson also and later Obama. So would you like to speak a bit about the afterlife of this original Rainbow Coalition in 70s, 80s up till Obama?
Yeah, so it's a catch-22. So what the party and the coalition would say is, our intention was never to put a black man into City Hall, here in Washington, the first African-American mayor, and definitely was not to put a black man into the White House as Barack Obama as the first African-American president. They wanted a revolutionary overthrow of the capitalist structure. This was a revolution. That's what their intention. However, as a historian, there's change over time. People appropriate your ideology, they appropriate your methods, and it's changed over time. Just subsequently, what resulted was these two elections, and they were revolutionary too. Just not in the traditional way in which we think of revolution, armed struggle, but like the survivor programs, right? Those were revolutionary. These elections were revolutionary, and so when I say Obama, it's not in a negative sense. How Black Lives Matter started on Obama. It's not an attack against Obama and his policy. It's an attack against white supremacy and the way in which it gets entrenched. We get the rise of Trump by attacking Obama, right? He's attacking Obama's character, his citizenship. He's a birther. And when people forget, that's how he became politicized, by using these white supremacist rhetoric against the first African-American president unapologetically, using misinformation, disinformation, all the things that are the norm. It comes out of that movement, and African Americans are being killed. But Black Lives Matter, we got a black president now. You better do something about this, and realize that this man is just as powerless as we are. It didn't make sense, but that's the truth. So if we go back to the past, the Rainbow Coalition dissipates because of oppression, particularly assassination, false imprisonment, exile. The state uses, it's a superpower. So they break the law. And so what the federal government begins to do is assassinate these party members. So Fred Hampton is probably the most egregious political assassination in terms of the Black Panther Party that most people know about, because he is a 20-year-old child, young adult murdered in his sleep by the state because of his politics. And if you read the sealed secret police records and government records, they argue that Fred Hampton, this 20-year-old middle-class kid from Maywood, Illinois, is more dangerous to the United States government than Martin Luther King or Malcolm X combined ever was, for one reason. Because not even Martin Luther King or Malcolm X can get Confederate flags, Southern whites, many of which are white supremacists, to form a coalition of solidarity against capitalism. Not even they were able to do that. And so he's assassinated for that. They don't hide it. But so in 1969, for example, you had 19 Panthers in leadership across the nation assassinated by the United States government. They murdered them. First two were on UCLA as students on campus in the classroom. John Huggins and Bunchy Carter from the Los Angeles chapter, murdered in the classroom. And the last person in 1969 was Fred Hampton, of course. But that wasn't the last raid. The last raid was on the Los Angeles chapter again, 4 days after Fred Hampton was assassinated on December 4th. 1969, the first ever SWAT team ever assembled was assembled in Los Angeles, the first ever in the nation to attack the Panthers, and they lost because those Panthers were ready, and they beat back and defeated the SWAT team in Los Angeles, led by many of which were ex-Vietnam veterans, had military training, thanks to Geronimo Pratt and others. So the coalition began to dissipate because people were being murdered by the state. And so this is not just happening to the Panthers, this is happening to the Young Lords, this is happening to the Young Patriots, or people are getting long prison sentences, right? This is the same time Angela Davis goes on trial, if you remember that, and she's not a Panther. She's just a professor at UCLA who's a communist. So if you can do it to her, you imagine what you can do to these young 19-year-old revolutionaries who aren't protected by being professors at one of the top universities in the nation. And she becomes public enemy number one, according to the United States government. Can't make this stuff up. This professor, female professor, is public enemy number one, right? And so then the state argues that the Black Panther Party is the greatest threat to internal security of the nation. How? At the same time, we having a war in Vietnam? These kids are the greatest threat to our nation? So that's the rhetoric. So how this white supremacist state government sanctioned rhetoric was used when Nixon, one of the most racist presidents ever to exist, took office. He gave the FBI, the United States government, full reins to go out and eliminate these people, and they did. So that's why the Rainbow Coalition begins to dissipate, that people became dejected. For example, at the height of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, when they had all these branches, they had almost 500 members. By the time Fred Hampton was assassinated, they're down to less than 50. Like, people run. Do you really want to die for your freedom? Martin Luther King is dead. Everybody's getting killed. Even Fred Hampton, 19 Panthers across the nation. They're shooting up officers. People leave. And so that's one of the reasons. So when Fred Hampton assassinated, Jose Chacha Jimenez, the user of the Young Lords, becomes the de facto leader of the Rainbow Coalition. Then he has to go underground into hiding to avoid false imprisonment and assassination from the state. So state repression really killed the official workings of the Rainbow Coalition, but people still began to work in solidarity. So the first thing that they did in Chicago, for example, was form a political electoral body, and they began to run people for office and oppose the machine, the daily Democratic machine, and other oppressors in the electoral arena, and began to win and to challenge folks. And this is how you get the first Black mayor of Chicago. This is how you get Congressman Bobby Rush, the founder of the Illinois chapter, is a U.S. congressman who's retiring soon for over 30 years. This is how you get Barack Obama as president of the United States. This is the reason Jesse Jackson appropriates the term. So these people find other ways of continuing the fight, but not risking their lives or their freedom. So they're working within the system, even though they're still anti-capitalist, they're still socialists, and all those programs that the Panthers created, these folks are still working within those entities, in the free clinics, in the legal aid clinics, and so forth. People go back and get law degrees so they can fight legal battles in the courts and things of that nature. So in the American context, I'm speaking of. And so the coalition is still at play. It just takes on different forms. So for example, Bob Lee, one of the founder of the original Rainbow Coalition, goes back to his hometown of Galveston, Texas. No elected official ever, you can't get elected anywhere in the 5th Ward in the state of Texas without support from Bob Lee. I mean, that's how important he was for organizing coalitions in the state of Texas, in a red state, against some of these racist Republicans and others. But he and his coalition kept their representatives in office, even to his deathbed in March a few years ago. So that's how the work continued, just not in the revolutionary spirit. And so subsequently what happened is people began to appropriate the ideologies in turn because it was effective for winning the elections. And so Harold Washington becomes this example of this. Again, one of the most racially, residentially segregated cities in America, in Chicago, this African-American man who was part of the Democratic machine, which the Panthers and the Rainbow Coalition saw as a problem, began to move away from the machine and join forces with the coalition after Fred Hampton was assassinated. So when he was assassinated, the Panthers led tours through that bullet-ravaged apartment building. And so people like Harold Washington, other politicians saw the epitome of state power, the white supremacist state power, and decided to defect from those machines and join forces with the coalition. The coalition had no intention of being involved in the electoral arena. They were pulled in by these politicians who said, this is what we do, and you already organized, let's work together. So they formed a different kind of coalition. And so they began to run people for office, and then Harold Washington becomes the first African-American mayor in the second largest city in America in 1983. And when he's elected, he created what he called his rainbow cabinet. So all those Panthers, young lords, young patriots, women, people with disability were all part of his administration. And he began to revolutionize Chicago politics in that way. So Jesse Jackson witnessed this and said, well, shoot, I'm gonna run for president. So he created what he called the Rainbow Push Coalition. At that time, he had Operation, he started off with Operation Breadbasket, and then became his various coalitions that he had, Operation Push. So he merged the idea of Rainbow Coalition with Push. So remember, this is an organization of grassroots activists. They don't have a brick and mortar building and office. This is not the NAACP, with elected representatives and chairmen of the board and so forth and so on, with bank accounts. No, this is just activists who are using Rainbow Coalition as a code word of solidarity to work together for a common cause. There's not an official organization in that regard. So Jesse Jackson trademarks it. He takes the term Rainbow Push Coalition and trademarks it. So you say Rainbow Coalition, you got to pay Jesse Jackson, right? True capitalist. Just to be honest about it. And then he sees the success of the coalition in one of the most racist episodes of Chicago politics to take place in his history. And this black man's elected despite all this racial strife and violence that took place, and he used his coalition to get elected. The light bulb goes off, and Jesse Jackson, well, I can use this, and so he appropriates it, and he runs for president of the United States. In the next year in '84. So this is how the trend begins. At this same time, Barack Obama moves to Chicago to become a political organizer, right? So he's familiar with the grassroots organized tradition, but he's not familiar with this Rainbow Coalition. He's very much a civil rights person, right? So he has this I would say he has more of a black nationalist ideology. So he tries to, Obama, immerse himself in these circles, but we don't know you, so we don't accept him. And I say we as a citizen and son of Chicago. He's from Hawaii, man. We don't know you. We're not following you, buddy. Get out of here. So he goes away, and he goes off to get a law degree. And while he's away, he falls in love with this woman who happens to be from Chicago, whose father was a precinct captain, who understands electoral politics and the Rainbow Coalition, who has connections to Harold Washington. And he falls in love. We don't give Michelle Obama the credit she deserves. Without Michelle Obama, there is no Barack Obama, right? And so she opens those doors. She introduces him to the right people. And then people begin to listen to him and accept him because of Michelle, because she's one of us. We don't know you. And so once that happens, Barack Obama begins to get involved in political affairs on the wrong side of things. He's one of those Democratic machine people, not the Rainbow Coalition folks. And so we ran a candidate. He was chosen by the machine to run against then original Black Panther Bobby Rush for Congress, because he was such a thorn in the side of the establishment that they wanted to get rid of him. And so they chose Obama. He almost committed political suicide. This is the only election Obama ever lost. And he gets creamed. Bobby Rush won 90% of the vote. He kills Obama. Why? Because Obama ran as a Black nationalist, whereas Bobby Rush ran as a Rainbow Coalition. It ain't about just Black issues. It's about all of us and the common lives we bring together. But Obama was smart. He learned something from that, and he appropriated it by using people who had worked in the coalition, like David Axelrod and others with the Harold Washington administration, others, and they became his campaign managers. And what makes David Axelrod so important is he made Rainbow Coalition ideology in terms of electoral politics a commodity. Like, you can package it up and sell it to a candidate. You don't have to believe it, but this is a method you can use to win elections. And he made a whole career out of it. He's genius at it. And he begins to change with the times, right? And then you do phone banking, or you knock on doors. Today is social media, right? And bots. He's genius at it. Whatever the methods are, he can still take that message, those ideological tenets, and apply it to the current context in some way. And I got to give credit where credit's due. He's not married to the politics at all, but he's genius at getting the message out, getting people to form the commonalities to come together for a candidate. So if you're a person of color between 1983 and Obama's re-election, right, in 2012, and you happen to be black, this would be specific, you black and you run for office, and you win relying on a predominantly white electorate, David Axelrod was your campaign manager. He was just genius at it. So Barack Obama would appropriate the politics because of David Axelrod, who and his loss to Bobby Rush introduced him to it, and he adopted and appropriated it, and he becomes the first black president of the United States. Who knew that these folks who were just trying to fight for revolutionary freedom in the 1960s will have the ideology, their politics, the methodology appropriated for personal gain from politicians 20 years and then 45 years later? Who knew? That was not their talk, but you get changed over time. And so that what that really demonstrates is there's a demand for it, that it's universal. It crosses racial and class lines, which is why it's so successful. Which is why these candidates were so successful, because this is what people want. And so now we're having that struggle now. So yes, Black Lives Matter begins under Obama because once he crosses this threshold, white supremacists will argue racism doesn't exist anymore. So, oh no, we need a whole nother civil rights type movement to remind you, just because he's in office, nothing has changed, right? And in fact, it's gotten exacerbated with Trayvon Martin and others, which are not new phenomenons. These ideas of police shooting our youth go back decades, go back centuries. In fact, that's the whole purpose of the founding of the Black Panther Party. They got tired of the police murdering us in our community. So they armed themselves to protect themselves primarily from the police attacks and vigilantes and murders, right? That's the whole purpose of the Black Panther Party, for self-defense when it was established, right? And so Black Lives Matter is just a continuation of the Black freedom struggle, right? So we wouldn't call it civil rights or Black power. It's the Black freedom movement. Just this is the current wave of it. The struggle continues. So all those issues that civil rights or Black people were advocating for 50 years ago are the same issues we're advocating for today, with new things added to it, like disinformation or HIV/AIDS or mass incarceration, things that didn't exist 50 years ago, but they're here now, along with all the same issues of lack of jobs, healthcare, unemployment, dilapidated housing, no good education. Listen, same things, right? This is exacerbated now. And so that's how the coalition was adopted. So even though these politicians used it for their own personal political gains, the community conditions do not change. In fact, they remain the same, and it gets exacerbated in a number of ways, which is why you get Black Lives Matter, which is why you get many of the struggles of folks taking place. And I keep emphasizing Black Lives Matter because we think it's just Black people. No, it's a coalition. There'd be more white folks and immigrants out there than anything, right? It's a coalition because our issues are everyone's issues. And so it's continuation of that kind of coalition politics. It's not a new phenomenon. So when Obama is running for office and he's using the rhetoric of hope and change and all these things, that's the rhetoric from the Rainbow Coalition, 1968. They're having the same thing. Without hope, you can't create change. That's their mantra. Jesse Jackson still keep hope alive. And then Obama is relying on it's hope and change. These are not new trends. These people keep appropriating and reusing things that work. This was Hampton the Panthers were using 50 years ago. And so it's just a new generation of how these things work. So the coalition is still important. People working in solidarity and coalition forums is still important. In fact, the international revolutionary polarity struggle is still important. We're still fighting for the freedom of African Americans, freedom for Dalits, freedom for Palestinians, the list goes on. Aborigines, the fight continues. These are still just the next generation of the struggle. So we as historians, scholars like to call it the Black freedom struggle. We're talking about African Americans in particular in the States, not just civil rights versus Black power or Black Lives Matter versus, no, it's a struggle. It's a continued protracted struggle. And it has different nuances and strands that overlap in a number of ways then and now today. So you see people marching in the street, you see buildings burned sometimes, you see shootouts between vigilantes and communities of police. So is that Black power and civil rights? Because I can go back and show the same thing taking place in 65, 67, right? It's a continuing trend. What we call it Black power, what we call it civil rights. So I always have these arguments with people because they argue there's a right way to protest. I'm so sick and tired of these folks. We have to be nonviolent. That's the right way to protest. According to whom? Because I don't see anybody attacking people, right? Violence is an attack upon a personhood. Nobody attacks people. They burn a building, set a police car on fire. That's not violence. It's not. It's destruction of property. It's vandalism, but it's not violence. Violence is things that take place in our communities when police murder us. That's violence. Or we can go through all the numerous episodes throughout history where white people come into our community and burn it down and murder us, from Tulsa race riots to Rosewood to the South Side of Chicago. These people come in and murder us in our beds, in our homes, and burn our communities down. That's violence. You can't find that ever happen in the history of America where Black people go into white people's community and burn them down because they don't like their race. So that's not we don't have race riots. We have uprisings, rebellions, but it's not a race riot. We're not attacking a race. And it's not violence. We're not attacking people. And if we fight anybody, it's the police. And the police are not people. They're an institution. Policing is an institution. This defund the police thing is about changing the institution, not the officer individual. The institution is the problem. So this is institutional racism. So we don't see these acts. I don't. You never get me to admit that this is violent. It's not. It's destruction of property, it's vandalism, but it's not violent. Violence is attack on people's personhood. What happened to Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, that's violence. Somebody lost their lives. You don't, what Kyle Rittenhouse and others are getting away with, murdering people, that's violence. These new trials we've had with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and others, with these vigilantes and cops being convicted, it's unprecedented. In the history of America, this doesn't happen. People go to prison for their acts of violence. So violence has always been used as a tool of control by America to control poor and oppressed populations. But we never use it against the people to overthrow our oppression. If we do, it's called a revolution, right? I mean, America prides itself on the revolution, the revolutionary spirit. And the founding fathers had a revolution to overthrow their oppression. Get out of here with this romanticism. These were aristocrats and slaveholders didn't want to pay taxes. And yes, they use violence to overthrow it because of their greed, not for some noble cause. This is crazy. But if we say it, then we're terrorists. But we don't attack people. We attack institutions, and we attack symbols of institutions like a monument or a building or a police car or a police station. But no one's attacking a community of white people or killing individual people. This does not happen. So stop calling it violence. So I'm always having these arguments with folks about the right way to protest. And then they romanticize King. You get all these right-wing conservatives arguing, invoking King's words, like taking King out of context. And see, that's, you should be like King. We right, we should, because King was an aggressive person, not a passive person. So you saying we should be like King as if you think King was soft or King was passive. No, he wasn't. It was direct action, confrontation. We're asking for you, just please stop killing us. I mean, so you misunderstood what King's whole purpose was, right? So when folks do that. So yeah, you're right. We should be more like King. Let's go agitate y'all and have some confrontations. That's what you want. So people just got all these various forms of misconceptions about what's going on. And I think I'm rambling now. Let me stop.
No, absolutely. In fact, the force in your voice reminds us of two very crucial things that we need to keep in mind, that coalition has to be thought as a construction of political subject and organization where one engages with difference outside of the paradigm of identities. So when we start thinking about coalition in identitarian manner, we actually are moving towards its commoditized appropriation, as you talk about, from 70s, 80s, which is broadly contemporaneous to the rights revolution and so on. So today, if we have to rethink about coalition, we have to actually remind ourselves what it meant as a code word for class struggle yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for reminding us the necessity of force in bringing about structural transformation and the necessity of coalition as central to construction of political subject and organization. Thank you so much. In fact, there are so many questions which we would like to discuss with you, perhaps in another series of conversations with you. And thank you so much on behalf of Indie Journal and all the colleagues. So it's our privilege and honor to have had this conversation with you.
Well, you're very welcome. Now I can't leave without saying something about Fred Hampton, who
Absolutely.
I believe is Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton. He's the most important political figure in the 20th century that most people have not heard of. So Warner Brothers recently did a film, a Hollywood film, which my book was used from the Bullet to the Ballot for the script.
Yes.
And it was based upon my book.
Right.
I say that because I do not endorse the film in any way, shape, or form. So
I was going to ask you about that actually.
So yes, should you see the film? Yes, because that's the only way most people will be introduced to Fred Hampton. They might not read my book, but they'll watch a film that won 2 Oscars, 2 Golden Globes, and so forth. I understand that. However, it is not a biopic of Fred Hampton. It is a biopic of the infiltrator who set him up for assassination. Yes. But I would never advertise the film as a film about the history and life of Fred Hampton, because it just isn't. It's a film about his death. If you're interested in how he was murdered, then yes, you should watch the film. But a biopic talks about a person's life, right? He's born, there's a mother, a father. None of that stuff is in the film, right? His childhood, none of that stuff is there. It's a film about the last 6 months of his life and his subsequent murder. So it's really just a biopic of the infiltrator who set it up. So I don't support the film. I was very upset at how my work was used. And this is what Hollywood does, right? They appropriate your work too and use it in the way in which shape they want to use it. So I would encourage people to actually go see the documentary, The Murder of Fred Hampton, the old black and white documentary by the film group in 1971. You can find it on YouTube, and that'll give you a more accurate description and history of Fred Hampton. You get his life, get his history, his ideology, see him in his own words. You can see the Rainbow Coalition taking place there. You can see the community service programs. You can see the political education meetings and how he's involved in those things. And I would say watch the film American Revolution 2, also by the film group. That's a film that really documents the Rainbow Coalition and all the work that the Rainbow Coalition is doing with Bob Lee, the Panthers, and others. So I, as a scholar, would say look at those documentaries before I tend to go watch the Hollywood version of the film. Even though Daniel Kaluuya did a great job depicting Fred Hampton, I give him credit for that. But that is not a movie about the history of life or the struggle of Fred Hampton. It's more of a biopic of the infiltrator, which is why I just can't support it. So it's a catch-22 for me. Oh yeah, my book was semi turned into a movie. Oh no, that's not the movie you should go see. So I can't tell you the movie is trash. Otherwise, I'm telling you my book is trash because it's based upon my work. But I can't support it because it's misleading people about who Fred Hampton was and his importance in some ways. But it gives you a glimpse of how important he was to the state and why the state murdered him, and he and others, because he was just that important and revolutionary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I was going to ask you about precisely this whole popular representation of Black freedom struggle in the contemporary media. And I was also reminded of another film on Nat Turner's Rebellion, The Birth of Nation, which you also, in fact, Nat Turner's Rebellion, you mentioned as a kind of a genesis of the armed self-defense in African-American radicalism. So it is fascinating to know your thoughts on these contemporary popular representations as well.
So we have a couple new phenomena that's taking place. So I call it the George Floyd effect. Prior to George Floyd, we didn't have this phenomenon. Now George Floyd has sparked an international movement away from this kind of white supremacist ideology. So you get all these films popping up and sitcoms and shows and books and teaching tools and diversity, equity, inclusion training across the capitalist enterprise and so forth. Call it George Floyd effect. So now you're starting to get, appropriate and adequate, actually, and most of the times correct interpretation of what actually happened. Like instead of calling the Tulsa race riot, it's being now depicted as it was, the Tulsa Massacre, which is exactly what it was, a massacre, not a race riot, it's a massacre. And so there's a lot of these things are taking place. So Judas and the Black Messiah, the movie that my book was used for the script, is another example of that. That Hollywood would never have made that film not in the way it did, that promoted Fred Hampton the way it did prior to George Floyd, for example. I call it George Floyd effect. And if they did, it would not have won 2 Oscars and 2 Golden Globes, right? So this is a George Floyd effect. People are starting to be more open-minded, at least in our American context, about the struggle of African Americans along the past. So it's a catch-22. Some of us are skeptical of it. I know I am. And how long is it going to last? And is our struggle being appropriated for capitalist enterprise, profiteering? And so we got all these other things at play. So which is why I always push folks towards documentaries and other books that don't have the same kind of agenda. You can still control the revolutionary purpose and tendencies of the product in some particular ways. But yes, in our current context, we live here right in Hollywood, excuse me, here in the United States, where most people unfortunately get most of their information from social media or movies and sitcoms. And so to see more representation is a good thing, never a bad thing. And I mean across the board. So you see a lot of way more South Asians, LGBTQ plus AI folks and others, all this representation that is now being depicted in the popular discourse that, in my opinion, just wasn't as salient as it was before George Floyd was sadly murdered for the whole world to see. So how long will this last? I don't know. I don't trust these systems. I don't trust capitalism. As long as it's profitable to be there, when it doesn't seem profitable anymore, even though it's right, it's probably going to go away and we'll be fighting for inclusion again. And so I always tell my students, enjoy it while it's here, but I always question. Because if we don't question it, like what I'm doing about Judas and the Black Messiah, if you don't question, then you'll leave with misconceptions about the representation. You'll leave thinking, which I don't like the movie, because you'll watch the movie and think the Panther were a violent prone organization that was headstrong about having shootouts and killing white people. That is not what the Black Panther Party was about, but that's what's in the film. And Fred Hampton was his leader. So you get the victimization of his murder for politics, but there's a whole lot of stereotypes and misconceptions in there too, because it's Hollywood. So please watch the documentary, because those stereotypes defeat the purpose of why we wrote the books. They're not trying to kill white folks, but that's what you get from watching the movie. Because that's how white people control the narrative in Hollywood. There's no Black people on that Warner Brothers executive board when they want to make money. Even though Shaka King and all the other folks who are trying to control the narrative, even Fred Hampton Jr. and his mother, in some way, shape, or form, have their hands on it. At the end of the day, Warner Brothers make the final decision. So just be careful out there with what you see in the popular discourse.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Please question.
Yeah. No, thank you for alerting us, because these appropriations in the popular domain is something one sees happening in India as well. So to be alert to that, to question them, and not to lose the sight that they are a part of the capitalist enterprise, that remains really the critical responsibility. Thank you.
Our struggle is now profitable, unfortunately.
Not absolutely. So yeah, thank you once again, Dr. Williams, and I thank Indie Journal for giving me this absolutely amazing opportunity to converse with you. There's so much I could learn from going through your book and talking to you. I'm looking forward to one more possibility of us conversing at some point. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I look forward to it as well. And
thank you for staying with us, and please respond to the interview in the comment section, and also like, share, and subscribe Indie Journal. Thank you once again.